What's up guys, thanks for stopping by, I hope you're doing good. The mountains in Valheim can be one of the most treacherous biomes in the game, especially if you're a new player. Whether it's navigating the terrain, dealing with the various mobs, or learning how to be prepared, this video is full of tips and tricks to make your life venturing into the mountain for the first time a little easier. And even for veteran players, this video will also have some advanced tips and tricks that I've learned speedrunning the game since release. Welcome to the Valheim Beginner's Guide to the Mountain. What's up guys, welcome. One of the first things we're going to be talking about in this guide is prep. This is something that comes up a lot whenever I stream Valheim and we get questions from beginners. Valheim can seem like quite a challenging game at first, but in reality, so long as you prepare correctly, the game is actually very easy. It's just a matter of how much time you invest in preparing by creating certain items and what specifically you choose to prepare with. So we're going to be starting out by talking about some of the best ways to prep for the mountain. So first up, let's just get this out of the way. Frost resistance potions are going to be your best friend. This potion type here that gives you frost resistance, just click it here, you see it lasts for 10 minutes. This is what is going to allow you to survive the cold whilst you're in the mountain. You will be able to craft items pretty quickly that will make this potion redundant, but before you have those, this is the way that you're going to survive the cold and what you need to be making before entering the mountain for the first time. In order to make frost resistance potions, you need 10 honey, 5 thistle, 2 blood bags, and 1 grey dwarf eye. So as you can see, as long as you have access to a swamp and you've gotten started with honey, you can easily get everything you need for this potion. Of course, in order to make the mead, you'll first need to make a mead kettle with 4 tin, 6 copper, 2 leather scraps, and a forge. And it'll look like this. And you'll be able to go up to it and choose to make the frost resistance mead base. I'm going to assume that you've done this before if you're at this point in the game, but if not, this is certainly the point in the game where you're basically forced to engage with the potion system and start making meads. So just in case you haven't started doing that yet, you will also need to make a fermenter if you didn't already know and start working on this. Fermenters require 30 fine wood, 5 bronze and 10 resin and a forge, and they also need to be sheltered. And all you do is you equip the mead base after making it in the mead kettle, and once you go and interact with the fermenter, you'll end up placing the mead base inside, and after a couple of days, your mead will be ready. So that's how you get frost resistance meads, and that is going to be the primary way that you survive the frost when you're first entering the mountain. Well, as I mentioned, you will eventually unlock some other items that do this too. So the first item that you'll probably get access to that will actually allow you to stop making frost resistance potions is the wolf fur cape. Now, there's a ton of other items in the game. Most capes from now on that you'll find as you progress will also give you frost resistance, but we're not going to go through all of those because I don't want to spoil too much. But I just will say right out the gate that it's totally worth investing in a cape. The frost resistance alone makes it totally worth it, but it doesn't really matter which cape you choose as long as it has frost resistance. And so obviously it's logical to go for the wolf fur cape because you do get these mats in the mountain, so you'll be able to use your frost potions to survive long enough just to get your mats for the wolf cape. This requires 6 wolf pelts, 4 silver, and 1 wolf trophy. And I've just put this resin here to remind me what level you need your workbench. So this will work at a workbench level 2. Now, I have included some other stuff, and that's for good reason. So technically, the Lox cape is for the next biome, the plains, but depending on how your world has been laid out, there is a chance that you may have bought some Lox already. Maybe you just don't want to deal with keeping making frost resistance meads. Maybe you're having trouble with the wolves or something. You might just find it easier just to spam some Loxes with arrows. If so, you could go for the Lox pelt, which also gives you frost resistance. It does have higher durability. It's kind of the only thing that makes it better. They're not that different, these 2 capes. You make this with 6 Lox pelts and 2 silver, so it's technically cheaper. It's just that you have to deal with the plains, which for you may be tougher. But as we explained in a previous video in the Beginner's Guide series about the plains, if you have that root harness, you'll be okay for the most part in the plains. This also requires a level 2 workstation as well. I do think it's very likely it'll be the best bet to still just go for the wolf fur cape and make those frost resistance meads first. It's the safest bet. But if you get lucky and you get the right RNG, it's definitely potentially worth going with the locks, because you do actually have to make less technically. And as long as you find a plains in time, this will actually save you quite a bit of time. The next thing I'm going to mention for frost resistance is the Fenris coat. So the reason I've included this is that if you decide to start exploring the dungeons and the caves when you're in the mountains, which is going to be very perilous. It's going to be one of the most difficult parts of the mountain. And if you're a beginner, I do recommend getting a little more geared before you decide to do this and getting some silver equipment. We can talk about that later. But the point is, sooner or later, you're going to start exploring those caves. And the Fenris coat is made from the mats that you'll find in those caves by fighting the Fenris in there and collecting all of the hair. This is one of the only ways in the game of getting frost resistance without wearing a cape. And it also makes you resistant versus fire. It gives you plus 15 fists, which is not overly useful unless you're planning on using the claws. But if you make the full set and you wear all 3 parts, you get Fenris Blessing, which gives you a movement buff. So I'm just letting you know that if you end up being able to make a Fenris coat early, it's just another way to get frost resistance. And if you just like really love the troll hide cape, or you really want to wear a linen cape which doesn't have frost resistance, this is a way you can get frost resistance without it. But this is probably a little bit more of an advanced thing. Speaking of which, lots of experienced Valheim players just prefer to wear the full Fenris gear for the whole game, just for the movement boost, because they're super used to the combat. I love that as well, but we'll talk about the caves later on. But just in case you want to make the Fenris coat to deal with the frost, it's 20 Fenris hair, 5 wolf pelt, 10 leather scraps, and again, you need a level 2 workstation. Again, most likely you're just going to go for the wolf pelt, because it is pretty likely you've not been to the plains yet. But technically, you could just use frost resistance and go straight for a Fenris set of armor if you're looking to cut down the amount of things that you craft. And if you get really lucky, you may even end up in a plains before you end up in a mountain, which could be unlucky depending on your perspective. But you could even cut out the need to make meads by just making a Lux pelt and go straight to Fenris. So I'm just letting you know your options, because Valheim is a randomly generated game at the end of the day, and not everything happens the same way for everybody. So one of the next things I want to talk about is to do with dealing with drakes. Drakes are going to be basically the #1 threat of you traversing the mountain other than wolves, and the best way to deal with them is obviously with a bow and arrow. Now, I'm going to assume that you already know about the crude bow if you made it to the mountain by this point. You probably have already dealt with the fine wood bow, and I do want to just say that you could stick with at least the fine wood bow. Either of these bows will still be okay, because it is more about the arrows. So if you're somebody that is a little tired of all the grinding in Valheim and you don't want to just make a ton of stuff, I get that. You could just stay conservative and stick with one of these and just focus on arrows as long as it's fully upgraded. However, I do highly recommend making a better bow. And if you're entering the mountain for the first time and you're doing everything in order, the best bow you can end up with first is the huntsman's bow. To make this, you need 10 fine wood, 20 iron, 10 feathers, 2 deer hide, and a level 1 workstation. This is a very good bow that can last you a long time. However, as soon as you get access to silver, you actually get access to one of the best items in the game, which is the Draugr bow, which I will actually equip this one because it looks super cool, because it glows. Kind of an iconic Valheim weapon at this point. The Draugr bow will actually also apply poison to the enemy. To make this, you need 10 ancient bark, 20 silver, 2 deer hide, 10 guck, which we'll talk about later, and 2 resin. I just want to reiterate, we're going to go over obtaining silver and stuff later in the video. So if you're wondering about how to get that, don't worry, we will cover it. But I'm just making sure you know all of your options going in, because some players are going to be able to get hold of some of this stuff quickly. So other than how to get hold of silver, which we'll talk about later, one of the big things with this weapon is getting the guck. Now, if you've been lucky or smart, or you just watched my other beginner's guide videos, then you'll know about this already. But I'm just going to reiterate this now for any beginners, because I did miss this on my first playthrough. The main source of guck in the game is actually these big green glowing things stuck to the side of trees in the swamp. So very easy to miss if you're not paying attention. It kind of just looks like part of the scenery, but that's the main way of getting guck. You can also get guck by fighting abominations, but this is the main source of guck. So that's how to make the Draugr bow, which is one of the best bows in the game that you'll get access to in the mountains pretty quickly, as long as you've gotten that guck in advance. The next important thing is arrows. So what I've done here is I've laid out all of the arrows that are useful or that you get access to in the mountains. So fire arrows when dealing with drakes are actually not too bad. You can use these if you just want to stick with fire arrows. They are very good for most of the game, honestly. However, it still might take a few shots, and if you're struggling with the mountains, needing a few shots to take out a drake could be tough. Although if you have a very good bow, you'll probably be able to take them out faster. Now, one of the things we're going to be talking about here is the difference between the pierce damage and the elemental damage of some of these arrows, because when it comes to fighting the mountains boss, which we will talk about later, what is actually most important is pierce. So really, if you just want to be meta about it, you would just want to go with the highest pierce damage possible at this point in the game, which might be the needles if you've gotten lucky enough to find some stuff in the plains and you're happy to take advantage of going to the plains early. But obviously, if you're not skipping any biomes, that's not going to be the case. So iron arrows, honestly, not that efficient, but they do have a higher pierce than fire. Frost arrows are amazing arrows for the entire game. However, most of the things in the mountains are going to be resistant to it, so I don't really recommend using them. However, if you loot every chest that you find in the mountains, you might loot a lot of these, which doesn't cost anything, so that's useful. Silver arrows, you will obviously get access to in the mountains because it's where you start getting silver. These are one of the most underrated arrows in the game, and actually could be useful in the mountains because silver weapons do spirit damage, and spirit damage applies sort of like a burning effect, but only to undead enemies, which does include all of the Fenris and stuff that you'll encounter in the caves or at night in the mountains. So silver arrows are actually very useful, even for fighting undead bosses, like your Gluth, for example. However, the arrow I recommend sticking with for your main in the mountains is poison arrows. This is what I recommend killing Modder with if you don't go with needle arrows, because they do 26 pierce and 52 poison. So you can add those two numbers up, which is a lot of damage. To make these, it's 8 wood, 4 obsidian, which you'll get from the mountains. We'll go over all of the mats and how you get them later. 2 feathers, 2 ooze, and you will need a level 3 workstation for this. Now, the one thing I will say is you may find that the grind for ooze gets a little bit annoying and that you don't want to have to keep grinding for poison arrows. Although you could save up all of the poison arrows that you loot out of the swamp, which is a good strategy. But if you find this grind annoying and you find yourself running out of poison arrows too quickly, you could just stick with obsidian because these have 52 pierce. Another arrow that is slept on in the game, actually very powerful at this point in the game, especially for fighting Modder, because, you know, if you factor in using needle arrows are better than any of these, and they just do 62 pierce. It's only 10 less damage than that. Now, it's still potentially 10 or more damage behind what the poison arrow can do with the status effect, which adds up over time. But obsidian arrow is also very good, so could be a good alternative. If you just find poison a bit too grindy, you can make these with 8 wood, 4 obsidian, and 2 feathers, and these require a level 3 workstation. I also just wanted to briefly mention that this is the point in the game where you finally want to buy your strength belt, the Megingjord. I really hope for your sake that you've found your trader already by the time that you're looking to fight the boss and deal with the mountains. If not, you get this by finding Haldor, the main trader in the Black Forest, and you'll be able to buy this Megingjord with gold. We'll show some footage on the screen of doing that, hopefully right now. You can, of course, sell any treasure to the trader in order to get that gold. But this is the point in the game where I would say you really want the Megingjord. Sooner the better, really, with this item anyway. If you don't know, this item gives you plus 150 carry capacity. And the reason it comes particularly useful in the mountains is because you may end up in a situation where you're ferrying tons of silver up and down the mountain. And doing that with a cart can be very frustrating. But also, because silver veins are buried underground, out of all of the ores in the game, silver is the one that's going to fill your inventory the most with stone as well, which is going to be just a little more frustrating without the Megingjord. We are going to talk more about farming silver later, but on the subject of finding silver and stuff, you're also going to want to use the wishbone in order to find silver. This is the item that Bone Mass drops, and it's basically like a homing beacon for finding silver in the mountains. Outside of the mountains, it can also help you find treasure. So just a little teaser there for what's coming later in the video. Now, let's talk a little bit about fire resistance. We've mentioned several times about potentially jumping ahead and going into the plains, and that's for good reason, because since they added the cave dungeons and the mini boss that can be in that cave, there's going to be good reason for returning to the mountain for a very long time, even after you've beaten the area boss. So there is a good chance you're still going to be using mountains long after you've been to the plains. And so you may have access to fire resistance, which is this barley wine here. You can see it lasts for 10 minutes. And obviously it makes you resistant to fire. The reason I'm bringing this up is that there are some fire spells that can be casted by the enemies inside the caves in the mountains. And so this can be a useful potion to have when exploring the caves there. In order to make this, you need access to barley, which you can either farm yourself or just loot from fueling camps in plains, which again we went over in the Plains Beginner's Guide video, so I highly recommend watching that if you haven't already. And 10 cloudberries, and this just works the same. You'll make this at the mead kettle over here, and then that'll give you a base, which you then will pour into the fermenter. And as you can see, we actually got some potions ready here. They'll get spat out like that. On the topic of potions and meads, I do want to say in general, this is also the point of the game where I highly recommend starting really getting into lots of potion production and really stepping it up, maybe even making a few different fermenters and getting used to always having different types of potions on you. There's loads of potions and meads in Valheim, and a lot of players tend to underuse them. I do recommend getting in the habit of basically always having health potions, always having tasty meads, and always having stamina meads. Obviously, health potions are self-explanatory. Just use it when you need to heal, when you're low on health. But the thing is, the reason why the other potion types are very useful, you can see here as I'm just spamming this attack, pretend like we're fighting here, right? I'm out of stamina and I can't do much and I want to run away. Perfect time to pop a stamina potion, and now I can just move a bit more and I can even just get stuck back into combat, right? Well, the problem is now once my stamina bar is drained a second time, this mead is now on a cooldown and I can't consume it. And I have to wait until it's over. That is when tasty meads are good. It'll temporarily boost your stamina recovery just for 10 seconds, which means that the cooldown is only 10 seconds. So you can see now the cooldown is over again. By the time my stamina bar is low again, I can do it again. And so it's actually really useful to spam tasty meads whilst you're waiting for stamina meads to cool down. This is something that obviously will consume a lot of potions and can become very grindy, which is why a lot of players don't do it. But it doesn't mean that it's not worth it. Maybe it's not something you want to do all the time because you don't want to just have to be constantly making tasty meads. If you do, then good for you. You can do this all of the time if you're happy to keep making them. But if not, it doesn't mean that it's never worth doing. This is super meta, a really, really good thing to do. And you could just save this strategy when you're actually in a boss fight or you're doing something particularly tricky and you just need a lot of stamina for a lot of combat or just for running away. So highly recommend getting used to using this setup, using tasty meads, stamina meads, and health meads. Just use the best version of whatever potion you have access to, and it should definitely increase your survivability. So something else worth talking about is the fact that at this point in the game, there is a chance that you have found the Bog Witch. If you've not seen the Bog Witch before, this is what she looks like. She'll show up as a cauldron in the swamp. And as you defeat different bosses, more things will unlock at the Bog Witch. She's just another trader, just like Haldor. What you'll want to buy is a serving tray. And what you'll get if you've defeated the first 3 bosses is this woodland herb blend. And it is actually worth buying this as well. So once you've bought these items, you could also buy anything else as well, of course, if you've noticed any other useful recipes. But what I want to talk about is feasts. So at this point in the game, if you've defeated the first 3 bosses, there are 2 feasts that you may have access to: the Swamp Dweller's Delight and the Black Forest Buffet Platter. In order to make a feast, you'll first need to make a food preparation table, which you need 5 iron, 20 fine wood, and 15 other scraps for. And then you can see at the food prep table, for the Black Forest Buffet Platter, you need 3 deer stew, 5 thistle, 4 queen's jam, and 1 of the woodland herbs that you buy at the Bog Witch. For the Swamp Dweller's Delight, you need 8 sausages, which we'll talk about sausages in a moment, 4 blood bags, 2 turnip stew, and 1 woodland herb blend, again from the Bog Witch. So what are feasts? Why are we talking about feasts? So first of all, in order to use feasts, You can see we've got a couple down already. But in order to place them, you will actually need the serving tray that I said that you need to buy from the Bog Witch. And then you can just select the feast that you have in your inventory, and then you can just place it wherever you want after that. So that's how that works. As you can see, what feasts actually are basically placeable meals that you'll have to periodically come back to your base in order to consume. Now, I just want to address this one thing about these particular feasts, because I know this is a topic in the community, which is that lots of people feel like some of the earlier feasts aren't really worth it. So I just wanted to talk about that real quick. So let's have a look at these feasts. So these feasts in particular that we're talking about, they give you 35 health and 35 stamina and a 3 HP tick, which is basically how much health you get back per second. The Swamp Dweller's Delight also does the same thing, 35 and 35, right? Now, one of the best foods at this point in the game that you can make are sausages. These sausages gives you 55 HP and 18 stamina with a 3 HP tick. Now, if we were to compare that with some other food that you have at this point in the game from exploring the swamp and stuff, you can see that yes, there is stuff that can give you 50 HP or 50 stamina, but at a massive trade-off. The stamina food only gives you 16 HP. The black soup only gives you 17 stamina. And if you were going for one of these other stamina meads as well, you're going to have a lower HP tick, which is either 1 or 2. Now, technically, one of the ways I always recommend to play Valheim is just by having your 2 best health foods at any given time and your 1 best stamina food. But if we just take sausages, for example, and now we consume the forest buffet platter and the Swamp Dweller's Delight, you can see that we do actually have quite a lot of health here. And so I just wanted to point out, although you can maximize one stat over another more effectively without platters at this point in the game, you can get a very balanced amount of stamina and HP by using these platters, and you will certainly have a higher HP tick, which is very useful. Not to mention the fact that the duration of both of these platters is 50 minutes, whereas the duration of sausages, for example, is only 25. So it's gonna last you twice as long. And so you have to ask yourself, once the food has been active for a certain amount of time, somewhere around that midpoint, how much HP and how much stamina are I actually going to have? Because the longer duration might mean that you have more HP and more stamina for longer. And also, it is worth pointing out that it's not about having a ton of one stat in Valheim. Once you have over 100 HP, that is a really good level of HP. It's more about a balance. You want a nice balance between stamina and HP because they're both just as important as each other. So I'm not saying that people are wrong. I just wanted to say that these feasts are more useful than it seems, and I actually would recommend using them for beginners. However, maybe use them quite sparingly because it may be a bit of a grind to have to keep buying ingredients in the long run, but they are a nice way at this point in the game if you're lucky enough to find the Bog Witch to get a nice balanced amount of health and stamina, because I mean, look at this, we got plenty of health and stamina to do the whole game like this. But anyway, just to wrap up food, sausages are really the absolute goat food at this point in the game. Muck shakes and turnip stew are good as well. In order to make sausages, you'll need 4 entrails, 1 boar meat, 1 thistle, muck shake for the stamina, 1 ooze, 2 raspberries, 2 blueberries, turnip stew, 1 boar meat, 3 turnips. These are all some of the best foods at this point in the game. However, you'll notice that they require a cauldron level 2, and that is actually more likely what you're going to be stuck at this point in the game. Not which food to choose, that I think is going to be obvious to you, even if you're totally new to the game. But how to upgrade the cauldron is not so obvious. So in order to upgrade the cauldron, obviously there's more upgrades the more you progress in the game. But what you technically will have access to by the time you're in the swamp is the spice rack. So to make a spice rack, you need 3 dandelions, 2 carrots, 5 mushrooms, 3 thistles, and 3 turnips. This is another thing I get asked all the time, how to make sausages. Well, this is how you do it. I'll hopefully show some relevant footage as I'm talking about this, but if you don't know how to get carrots or turnips already, well then what you need to do is go to the Black Forest and look for these specific type of flowers. That will give you carrot seeds. Then you need to make a cultivator and you need to plant and farm those carrots for the cultivator. And after some time, a few days, the carrots will be ready. And that's how you get access to carrots. You can then replant the carrots to get more seeds. With turnips, it works the exact same way, except for you're looking for these flowers in the swamp. And that's why this Cultin upgrade is sort of locked behind the swamp, because you'll have need to farm a little bit of turnips before you can make the spice rack. There's just a couple more things I want to talk about before we get into combat and what to do in the mountain itself. The first of which is about traversing the mountain. So earlier I mentioned that using tasty meads and stamina potions is really good for when you're in combat. Well, the exact same logic applies for traversing the mountain. Oftentimes running out of stamina can mean sliding all the way back down a mountain, which can be super annoying. And using stamina meads and then using tasty meads when the stamina mead is on cooldown is a really great way to make sure you have enough stamina to climb the mountain in the first place. Next, I also want to talk about what abilities are good to use. Lots of people will want to use bone mass, and I will say that using the bone mass ability is good if you are struggling with the difficulty of the mobs in the biome, and especially when you're clearing caves, bone mass is definitely the way to go. But just remember that if the problem is climbing the mountain itself, then the Eikthyr ability does give a massive stamina reduction when you jump. So you will actually use less stamina, which is extremely useful when climbing the mountain. So maybe you can use Eikthyr, climb the mountain, put a portal down, portal back to base, change the bone mass, and just use the bone mass ability when you're actually dealing with mobs. Which brings me on to my final point before we go to the mountain itself, which is actually a little speedrun trick in some of my guides to try and include some tips from the speedrun, as I have been running the game since release. And there isn't a ton of tricks in the mountain, but the main one that is actually absolutely incredible is the fact that you can actually combine the effects of Corpse Run with the effects of the Eikthyr ability. So in case you didn't know, Corpse Run doesn't just heal you. It actually also gives you stamina reduction when running and jumping. And this stamina reduction does actually stack with the additional stamina reduction you get when using Eikthyr, meaning that you will use so little stamina when running and jumping that you'll basically have infinite stamina for the duration of a corpse run. So to do this, what you want to do is set up a bed at the base of a mountain, or even just a portal if you want. Kill your character by doing /die in the chat box, or just letting a mob kill you or something, so that you place a corpse run at the bottom of the mountain, come back to the body, use your Eikthyr ability, grab the corpse run, quickly grab some food and equip some gear, and then constantly spam jump. If you are running up a really steep slope, you can spam the space bar and you will basically launch yourself up the mountain because of the infinite stamina in this scenario. This is a super good trick for climbing mountains very quickly. And like I said, you could just slap another portal down at the top, go back to base, grab the bone mass ability, and you're good to go. And of course, whenever you're progressing through the game, it's always worth checking whether or not you're able to increase your comfort level at your base. So just make sure you check the furniture tab, built any new furniture, or upgraded your bed if you haven't yet, because increasing your comfort level will of course increase the length of your rested buff, which always increases your survivability, and the mountain is no exception. Now, at this point in the video, we have discussed a ton of tips and tricks about handling the mountain. However, so far, it's pretty much all been about preparation, which is good because preparation is the most important part. However, I do also have a bunch of additional tips. So in the interest of time, I'm going to do kind of a quick fire round to get as much information to you as possible. And then, of course, we'll get on to talking about the boss. All right, so a quick fire round. You can jump on golems' heads and use a pickaxe on them in order to kill them. It's worth noting that wolves can actually be tamed, so you may want to start doing that early. You can tame them with meat. The terrain in the mountain can be a nightmare, but you can use that nightmare to your advantage by jumping on rocks to avoid getting hit, digging holes that you can hide in or that you can push the enemy into in order to trap them. Kiting enemies onto fires, especially wolves in the mountains, is pretty much always useful in Valheim. You're generally going to want to avoid nighttime even more more in the mountain because Fenris will start to spawn and you will encounter more wolves at night. Just remember the stuff we talked about in some of the previous guides about parrying enemies, especially when using a buckler for the extra damage. That still applies in the mountain. You're going to be fighting Draugrs, but you can still parry wolves and Fenris and stuff as well. Placing a campfire down will always stop you from freezing, even if you don't have any frost resist, so you can use it when you're out of frost resist in a pinch. However, when a blizzard comes, it will put the fire out. However, if you use a large bonfire instead of just a campfire, that actually won't go out in a blizzard, and that will also stop the freezing as well. If you want to just yeet it off the side of a mountain to maybe save a little time, you can always fall damage cancel by logging out and logging back in again just before you hit the ground. However, if this is too technical, remember 100 is the max damage that you can take in Valheim, so if you have more than 100 HP, you'll be able to survive the fall anyway. There's tons of convenient build spots that you can use for doing cool builds, or even just put in a portal down in a pinch in the mountains. Any of the towers that spawn there, the sort of ruined castles, they can be really good, especially if you clear out the mobs and destroy any spawners that might be there. They can make a good spot for a portal. If you're going to end up in a cave with very minimal gear, torches are actually pretty good against bats. You should also know that caves have a rare chance of spawning a fishing rod. I'm probably not going to bother capturing footage for that for this video unless I go and find footage from an old video because it's very rare, but just keep a lookout for the large open rooms with frozen bodies of water. They can spawn a fishing rod sometimes. You can use sledgehammers to find silver. Eggs are generally easier to spot at night because they glow. The shacks in the mountains can be a nice way of getting some extra core wood. Remember to loot every chest in the mountain because you can find onion seeds, and onions are actually one of the best things to farm in the game. Destroying gates and braziers in caves can give you some mats, and you should probably know that the wolf does unlock some pretty useful recipes early game if you want to upgrade your food. When it comes to key mats to keep an eye out for in the mountain, obviously silver is one of them. In order to find silver, you equip the wishbone and it acts like kind of a beacon and it starts beeping. And the faster it beeps, the closer you are, and then just dig down and you'll find the silver vein. All of the Fenris mats that you get from killing Fenris or looting the caves are very useful to get that Fenris armor. Don't sleep on obsidian. Obsidian arrows are great and they're used for a bunch of other good arrows, so you want to keep an eye out for that. Wolf pelts, of course. You get crystal by destroying golems, and you can use that as sort of like glass windows, and you can also find some crystal in caves. You get freeze glands for killing drakes, which are good for frost arrows, and of course you want to keep out for dragon eggs because you use those to summon the boss. When it comes to the gear to make in general, in terms of like what I think you should prioritize, because most people aren't going to want to make everything. Obviously, upgrading to the wolf cape is worth it if you don't already have a Lux cape. The silver armor might not actually be worth the grind, although it is very cool, so I do kind of still recommend it. Silver in general is pretty grindy, but I always make a silver sword because spirit damage is mega important. And of course, this biome will give you access to the Draugr bow and the Frostnet. The Frostnet is probably the single most important weapon that you'll get access to in this biome. So if you just make one weapon from this biome, let it be the Frostnet. You can not make a silver sword and go just for a Frostnet instead. Although the silver sword in some scenarios is going to give you more spirit damage. Crystal battle axe is very cool looking, but not that useful. But if you like style over substance, then go for it. And of course, the Fenris armor set in some people's eyes is basically the best set of armor in the game because of that extra movement buff. It is certainly one of the very top armors in the game for its fire resist and its movement buff, so I highly recommend prioritizing that. Now let's talk about the boss of the mountains, Modder. It will come as no surprise if you've made it all the way to the mountain that in order to find Modder's location, you'll have to find a boss room or Vegvasir in the mountain biome itself that once interacted with will reveal the boss's location. Vegvasirs for Modder can be found in two different spawn locations in the mountains. The first are the tall single towers that can be found outside whilst exploring the mountain. It's worth noting that while it doesn't matter what the current state of this single tower is, it can be quite ruined or it can be completely intact. It does matter that it is one of these single towers, because the larger structures that you'll find while exploring the mountains outside cannot spawn the modder rune. So just bear that in mind. You're looking for these small structures in particular. That is the only exterior type of structure that can spawn a modder rune. So don't waste your time looking in shacks or the other tower types. The other location where you can find a modder rune is inside the mountain ice caves. There's a few different spawn locations, like they can be on a frozen lake, for example, but usually they're just a couple of rooms removed from the entrance somewhere on the wall. Once you've found Modder's location, you'll then of course want to summon her, and in order to do that, you'll need to find 3 dragon eggs. This is one of the main reasons why you're gonna want the strength belt by the time you're exploring the mountain, because these eggs are very, very heavy and cannot be teleported. However, they are very easy to find, and whilst it is totally legitimate to find these in advance and travel all the way to your model location, it is worth noting that there is a pretty good chance you'll be able to find all 3 eggs on the modern mountain where she spawns. So I'd maybe delay on hoarding these unless you're prepared enough to do it all in one trip, so you don't have to keep going across the map. So now you've got everything you need to summon Modder, let's talk about the boss fight itself. Most of the preparation we've covered already, so just go with the best armor that you currently have access to, level it up as much as you can, bring all of the different types of potions. I like to just bring the silver sword, the Drogafang bow, and a couple of 100 poison arrows, although that's probably quite excessive. For the fight itself, it is actually not as hard as it seems. Whilst Modder is in the air, she'll fire these ice projectiles, and as long as you're looking up and paying attention to where these are coming from, all you need to do is sprint away from them to make sure you don't get hit. You'll want to be always trying to get a hit in with a poison arrow whenever you can, but when things really turn is when Modder lands on the ground. She'll only attack when she gets pretty close, although she does have a projectile attack where she breathes ice, but it is worth noting that that can be dodge rolled. But a lot of the time, she'll just allow you to shower poison arrows on her over and over until she's dead. If you're impatient like me, you can run up to her and get some melee attacks in there while she's on the ground. And if you're confident with your dodge rolls, you can just dodge roll every melee attack. Lots of newer, less experienced players may not want to do this, and that is totally fine because this fight is pretty easy if you just keep your distance and keep showering poison arrows on her. Of course, pop a heal when you need to. When you're out of stamina, pop a stamina potion. When your stamina potion is on cooldown, pop a tasty mead for stamina. And yeah, if you make sure you go in with the rested buff, you should be fine. However, there is a speedrun strat that I will show on the screen right now, where you can actually dig out a trench underneath and around the Modder altar. And if you place a bonfire while you're down there, she'll actually take fire damage, and you'll even be able to shoot arrows above if she gets close enough. If you're really struggling and you just want to get the boss fight over with, speedrun strats like this are a good way to do that, although I doubt you'll have enough trouble to have to resort to that. And that's it. That's how you defeat Modder. Once she is defeated, her trophy will give you access to an ability that will point the wind in the direction that your ship is sailing in, allowing you to make some faster journeys with the boat. And you can use her tears to make an artisan table, which will allow you to craft some more stuff, further progressing the base building and the crafting in the game. And that is it. That is the Valheim beginner's guide to the mountain. This video took a long time to put together, and I had to think about it a lot because there's a lot of information to include. So I hope you found this video useful. If you did, make sure you leave a like and a nice positive comment for the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe for future content. Oh, also, we didn't go super in depth with the caves because I do have a video all about how to deal with all of the mini bosses in the game, including the one in the mountain, which resides in the caves. So I'll leave a link in the description to that as well. I just didn't think it was worth retreading old territory there. So hopefully you find that video useful as well. You can support the content financially on Patreon at patreon.com/NickRawcliffe, and in return, you'll get access to a couple of Valheim servers. You can join my Discord and follow me on social media at the links below. And until next time, have a good one.